Hello, I'm Redmond Bacon, and this is Descent into Korean Cinema. Next up is Decision to Leave, the 11th film by the veritable genre auteur Park Chan-Wook. It's a mysterious neo-noir, erotically charged mystery that Screen Daily says reasserts his position as a peerless visual stylist. It does beg one simple question: should you make a decision to pay, or should you make a decision to stay away? You know how it is. One day you're investigating the potential murder of a man while hiking. The next thing you know, you're in love with his immigrant Chinese wife. But here, it's not so much of a whodunit as a how much can you feel it, resulting in a particularly woozy romance.
정상에서 떨어지셨다고 봐야지. 저기, 여기.
And so on. There's not much point in actually including much of the trailer, considering as it's all in Korean. So without much further ado... So hello, Fred, and welcome to Descent into Korean Cinema.
How you doing?
I'm good. So I watched this film around 2 days ago in the evening, and I have lots of thoughts. But let's start with your snap verdict.
I liked it. Give it 4 stars. Looked amazing. The plot was a lot of fun. Lots of nice absurd moments. Sometimes I felt that it lost its way due to the complexity of the plot. It sometimes sort of peeled away from me, and I think from everyone else who I know who just watched it. But I would say to anyone that they should watch it. I thought it was really good. But what about you, Clive?
I think you're right that it is a film you should watch, perhaps despite of itself and despite some of its impulses. I would, in the words of Anthony Fantano, who's like a music reviewer, he says a 6 to a light 7. So somewhere between 6 and 7, but not quite a strong 7, as it were. I thought the problem I had to begin with the film was right from the beginning. I was sort of playing catch up as to what was going on, because on the one hand, it's very simple. It's a love story. It's a noir. It's about this woman and this man, the cop, who's following this sort of femme fatale, Black Widow style woman. But then on the other hand, it interweaves all these other elements and all these other characters where I'm sort of thinking to myself, what? Maybe the whole time? Maybe that was because of the subtitles. Maybe it was because of something else. Maybe there's so much information going on, especially with the text. I'm not sure, but I really loved so much of the visual stylings. He's one of those directors where I'd happily watch a bad film by him than a good film by a journeyman. So that's always enjoyable. And it would have been amazing to have seen it in Cannes, where it won Best Director. And it is also Korea's submission for Best Foreign Feature Film. So they must have not seen the 2 or 3 Hong Sang-soo movies, which were also released this year. But talking of Hong Sang-soo, you kind of had a Hong Sang-soo approach to watching this movie, Fred.
Yeah, I went for a big Korean meal at our favorite restaurant, Po Cha. I got very drunk and went to see it afterwards. The guy that I went to the restaurant with fell asleep in the cinema and was rolling his head back into the audience right behind us until I eventually sort of pushed him down into his chair to prevent that from happening. So yeah, I mean, if I say of the film that the plot was complex, it might have just been that I was not sober enough to fully appreciate it.
It is one of those things. We have to talk about the one time we watched a film when we were very drunk, and it was Portrait of a Lady on Fire, where we were in Berlin Neukölln, and we went to a very local Kneipe, where we were probably the youngest guys there by maybe... A Kneipe is a pub, just for all the people who don't know German. A very old person's Kneipe, where we were probably the youngest people by about 40 years, and the music was from German radio. And we may have had... I don't think we drank that much. It was about 2 or 3 beers, but it kind of just knocked the seriousness out of us that perhaps Portrait of a Lady on Fire deserved. And you famously missed the ending because you went to the toilet. So
But I think I went to the toilet so many times that I couldn't face going back in and disturbing the audience again.
If I know I'm going to the cinema, I try not to drink beer beforehand for this specific reason. I'll get like a Coca-Cola or something else. Or if I know a movie's 2.5 hours, I will skip on the beer.
I didn't go to the toilet once in this movie, and I drank, I think, considerably more before going in. So I don't know if that says something about the film and that it gripped me. Yeah. So 0 pisses.
So let's just give a shout out for Pochar, 30 Lower Marsh, London, SE17RG, 4.3 stars on Google reviews. It's got a £1 sign, which for London is actually pretty good. And I have to say, it is a cheap restaurant, sort of for Europe, not just for London. So if you're ever in Waterloo, go to Pochar. So, Fred, how familiar are you with this director? Unlike the esteemed director, or not so esteemed director, of All My Friends Hate Me, Park Chan-Wook is now on his 11th film. He's also directed multiple shorts and 2 TV shows, as well as executive producer on Snowpiercer. So tell me, which films of his have you seen? And if you haven't seen them, maybe I can jog your memory.
Yeah, I've seen the Revenge trilogy. So Old Boy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, and Lady Vengeance. So I've seen those 3 movies, as probably quite a lot of people that enjoy cinema have, but I haven't seen any of his other stuff. Like Snowpiercer is news to me. I didn't know that he had part in that. So this is my 4th movie that this director has made.
So he produced the original film Snowpiercer, and then he executive produced the TV remake, which I, for some reason, have seen all 3 seasons of. It is crap. So Park Chan-wook has a kind of interesting career that his first 2 films are basically impossible to see because he said that they were so bad that he wiped all record of them ever existing. So in actuality, his career starts in the year 2000 with Joint Security Area, which is set in the border region, the DMZ, between North and South Korea. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's a very good movie. And along with Hong Sang-soo's first film in, I think, 95, and with The Dogs Barking at Something by Bong Joon-ho. Again, for the Korean listeners, I have to apologize repeatedly for my pronunciation. It sort of heralded the Korean New Wave. So, and Park Chan-wook was very well known for making films that are extremely violent and with lots of twists. So Old Boy is famously known for eating octopus, a massive fight scene, and then the twist to end all twists. And when I watched Old Boy when I was a kid, I thought, this is the coolest movie and the greatest movie of all time. And then when I rewatched it, I was like, yeah, it's good. What did you think about Old Boy? Because some call that like the best Korean movie of all time, at least in the modern era.
I really loved it. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was amazing. Again, I think something I've noticed with Korean cinema and some of the Korean TV that I've watched is that it is very plot driven, like the action in a way that, it feels like that's what drives a lot of these films. And like the plots are quite sort of bombastic and they really move around. And that's, obviously true for Old Boy. I have to say, I think I preferred Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, even though Old Boy is, I definitely think, far more full-bodied and there's so much more to unpick. Something about the sort of free and easy style of Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and the way that it looked and the way that the characters like dressed and the aesthetic of it. I think that movie did it more for me. But yeah, I mean, Old Boy was absolutely stunning. A really cool film.
And have you seen I'm a Cyborg, but That's Okay?
I have, actually. I didn't know that was him.
That's him as well. That's his most whimsical film. I was absolutely enamored with it because, like most British people growing up, you sort of get into cinema by watching film 4 movies
Yeah.
at like 2 in the morning, maybe on the school holidays or something, where you really have nothing to do, or at least you're privileged enough not to have a job. So you sort of just sit at home and watch film 4. And that's kind of how I got into cinema in general. There was Bergman, there was the Miyazaki movies, all these kind of things. And that one, I didn't love it, but it is unique. And I think that's what you can say about him. He's a man with a style, and he sticks to it. And then in recent years, I think he's moved away from the violence into more relationship based films and also more complex plotting, which now brings us to Decision to Leave. Let's just talk about the plot to start with. As I said earlier, I think it is quite a simple plot in its essence, but then there's all this sort of surrounding scaffolding and also a very chaotic editing style that can make it kind of hard to follow. So do you know what happened?
So as I saw it, there's a detective, a homicide detective, who is called to the scene of a murder. His investigation leads him to the wife of the murdered man, who he quickly becomes very enamored, maybe even obsessed with. So he's investigating her and sort of, I think, pretending to himself that he's investigating the crime when he's in fact probably more interested in this woman. He discovers that the woman is the murderer. I think that's very obvious from the start that she is, and he basically lets her off. He doesn't follow her up, doesn't pursue her, and he says of her that she has completely destroyed him. Then we're taken to a sleepy town. So the first place that we come to, the first town or city, is quite busy. This other place is very quiet. The detective can't sleep, is bored out of his mind with his wife, just not interested, unable to sleep. And then another murder happens, and this woman that he's been obsessed with seems to have something to do with it. She's turned up in the town, in the sleepy town, almost like she's found him, and then seems to have killed again. And I won't say anything more than that, because I feel like you can still watch this movie with those pieces of information and it still be interesting. Or are we doing reveals? I don't know.
I think we can get into it later with a little bit of a disclaimer. So one of the key influences that people said that it has is Hitchcock's Vertigo. Did you get a Hitchcock Vertigo vibe from this, especially in perhaps its dual structure?
Yeah, and I think the sort of use of heights. There's the famous sort of fool at the start, well, not famous, but yeah, the husband of the person that the guy's obsessed with, falls from a very great height, and there's all these sort of like camera shots which sort of zoom down, much like in Vertigo, where the guy's suffering from that. So yeah, I can totally see Vertigo in there.
And it uses this thing called the vertigo effect, which, according to studiobinder.com, is an in-camera visual effect created using a dolly zoom. This is where the foreground remains in the same position while the background either shrinks or grows depending on the direction of the character movement. And this has been used by everyone. I mean, you see this a lot in The Lord of the Rings, and you'll also see this a lot in the films of Martin Scorsese. I mean, the style itself is just beautiful. I love so many of the shots and the compositions. I especially like the scene where they're doing the interrogation, and they do this thing of focus, which is really interesting, because he's looking at her, interviewing her, and then you have the mirror behind them, which I assume isn't a mirror, but it's composited with CGI. And then I think one of them's in focus in the mirror and one of them's in focus in the foreground. And I don't think you can do that in camera. Maybe you can, but it's just a really fascinating shot. But I can't help feel sometimes that the style itself is kind of so busy and doing it so much that while it heightens some of the emotions in the film, I'm wondering if there was a different way to go about it. I mean, do you think he could have told this as a sort of straight kind of romance or film like a detective story and it still would have worked, or is the style sort of essential to its construction?
I mean, it felt like the unique thing about this film was that style. I know you wanted to talk about the phone shots, and yeah, whilst I guess I did think of Hitchcock with the sort of effect that you're talking about, it didn't feel like he made it his own, the director. And yeah, I think that what was interesting about this film was certainly the style. I get what you mean about it sometimes almost taking you out of the story as an audience. So in a way, it was a detractor. But I think there are a few different things in this film that do that. It's not just the style. I felt that the use of like the absurd humor sometimes was so on the nose that again, it kind of was not in keeping with the more sort of sophisticated storytelling. It's very like nuanced film, nuanced characters, and then sometimes these sort of like real kind of like asides to the audience almost with a little joke, which I felt kind of pushed me out of the storytelling at times. So yeah, I felt like this film sometimes was a bit of a Frankenstein. I don't know what you thought. I mean, it seems like you maybe you feel a similar way.
There was one part in particular where he's in the car and she's in the apartment, and then he's in the apartment looking at her, and it's supposed to be a visualization of him being close to her in his mind. But I honestly thought it was a different person, and there were two cops working on the case, and I got really confused, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think I'm trying to think of the closest filmmaker in the West who it's like, and actually I came up with, do you know like Sam Raimi, who did the Spider-Man movies and Evil Dead, the original Spider-Man trilogy? He also uses these transitions which are like absolutely nuts, where like it's a guy's sunglasses. I think it's the Octo dude played by Alfred Molina in Spider-Man 2, and it goes through his sunglasses, and then you get Spider-Man at the end of the shot, and it's like super cool. And this film does that a lot. Like there's a still photo, I remember, and then it goes through. And obviously I've seen that kind of effect before, but the way it's done, with the way the camera moves, it's really, really effective. And I think what's also effective is the use of cell phones. I remember I saw a tweet, I just pulled it up, by a guy called Nick, 4 times BIFA BioNTech recipient, great, cool name, who says Tar and Decision to Leave. So I haven't seen Tar, but Tar and Decision to Leave are about how phones can destroy lives. And another person says it's the best film to date that uses cell phones in such an innovative way that is part of the story and does not feel distracting or dated at all. And I think I can agree with that, because I've seen so many films that try and use phones and you get like the little bit of the bubbles coming or like the text coming through.
Yeah.
You have a choice when you want to use a phone. It's either you want to visualize it in a really poppy way and it kind of feels distracting, or you just do a shot of the phone itself in a realist style and that feels quite flat. But here we have shots which are like inside the phone, and there's one where he's like looking at the three dots as she's writing a message, and I felt that was really cool. And then of course the whole thing, it sort of hinges on a voice recording, and I thought that was really interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. Like, I suppose I didn't think too much about the use of phones in the film, which implies that it was quite like a good transition. And again, I was quite drunk, so it just seemed completely like normal to me. That it just seemed like how I would use mine. So yeah, it was successful in that way, and yeah, it wasn't too jarring. But yeah, I could definitely like, think of all those shots now, and they did seem to come off quite well.
Maybe this could be the new format for the podcast. One of us watches it sober and the other one watches it drunk. So the other sort of main theme in the film, again using phones, and which felt very true to life, is the use of, I guess it's not Google Translate here, but the use of the phone to translate the haltedness of language, because the woman in the film, Song Soo-rae, played by Chinese actress Tang Wei, and it's always nice when they cast someone actually from the country that they're supposed to be from in a movie. So she's from China, and she says repeatedly that her Korean is not that good, which
Yeah.
to me I couldn't tell whatsoever. But obviously she must have an accent or something. And sometimes she will go into the phone and say something, and then that will come out as a translation, which actually has happened to me when staying in a hotel in Italy with the owner who decided to speak in Italian, and then the voice robot would translate what he said. So this does actually happen quite a lot, and it is actually quite a useful tool to have. So we kind of have this little bit of a culture clash, and her background in China, which I quite liked the fact that it's not that well defined, and there's about her grandfather, and he weaves in this like historical relationship between the two countries, which he did a little bit with The Handmaiden, which was about a colonial relationship between, I think, Korea and Japan in World War II. Don't quote me on that. So this is something he's obviously preoccupied with, which is the weight of history and then how these things intersect. So I guess my question to you is kind of, do you think that added another element, this sort of bit of culture clash in the film, even though it feels like she's not that different?
Yeah, definitely. I felt, for me, that was almost the most interesting thing about this film, the way that her status as a sort of outsider within Korean society interplays with her status as the killer, or the, you know, I found that really interesting. It made me think about how much she was disclosing about herself, which seemed again to be the most interesting point. One of the most interesting things about this film is like, to what level is she, evil or bad? To what level is she forced to do this because this murder, because I think she's an economic migrant, and her status in the country is not good. So if her husband tells the authorities about her, she'll be deported. So that her husband's the one that she murders is abusive. And when she says my Korean's not that good, I was thinking whilst I was watching it, is it, or is that just her kind of underplaying her hand? Yeah, it was like an interesting way of the femme fatale character kind of being realized. It was nice to hear Chinese spoken, well, Mandarin and spoken in the film. Yeah, and like I've always felt that there is this kind of thing in Southeast Asian countries with like South Korea is so much more wealthy than China in terms of GDP, and there's obviously a threat from China, and it's regionally powerful. The politics, kind of come out. So yeah, I definitely just felt like that her status as a Chinese national kind of raised so many questions within the film, and gave so much for us to like unpack. I guess kind of put the detective into quite a nice relief. I felt that his fascination with her, and it's almost like he finds his life unfulfilling. He's always looking for some kind of drama, and perhaps that's why he is a homicide detective. And then when this aloof character comes into his life, that quickly becomes the most interesting thing for him, his relationship with this individual, which makes him abandon his detective work. And when he says, "You have destroyed me," after he sort of lets her off for the killing, because he can't countenance putting her in jail, whilst also loving her. He realizes that he doesn't care about being a detective. He doesn't have any integrity. Probably never did. He just likes the drama. It's like the most interesting thing in an otherwise very boring life. And perhaps that's also a reflection of Korean society, and for him, and the sort of comfort that you see everywhere within the film. There's his home is so comfortable, his like marriage is so comfortable. So yeah, like for me, that sort of like outsiderness made him reflect on his life and abandon it to an extent, and that's what destroys him, or his idea of himself. So yeah, I just definitely felt that was so important for the film, and that's why they were so keen to sort of underline that with the speaking into the voice note thing. Like that was almost like them saying, I am a Chinese character, I am not part of your society, and I need this tool in order to engage with it. So yeah, hugely interesting. I think that it was interesting as, you know, an English speaker watching this Korean movie, this character saying, you know, I can't speak Korean very well. I can't speak Korean very well. Like, you couldn't tell whether or not she was mispronouncing Korean. I'm sure she was, but her, I suppose, non-Koreanness didn't come through very well for me as someone that couldn't engage with it in that way. So I thought it was interesting that the subtitles didn't kind of like change the way that her language looked. Like, you know, maybe they could have made that clearer with the subtitles so that it would have helped aided us as like an audience. But again, it didn't make it not interesting. If anything, it made it more interesting because I was really kind of listening out for indications that she couldn't speak it well. What did you think? Sorry, that was a massive monologue from me there.
No, I think I agree with you on the most part. I'm not sure there's much to disagree on, but it still makes for an interesting discussion of her character. But isn't she like, I thought she was trafficked by this other guy, and then there's like some kind of, he dies off screen, or because then she marries again, and there is some kind of gangster thing going on, and then they're chasing each other. So there is some kind of Chinese gang undercurrent to the movie. Maybe I'm wrong.
So the gang stuff, as I saw it, is in the second part of the film and seems to be because the Chinese character has married an investor who's invested the mob's money, or rather the money of a mob member's mother, and then lost it. You know, it's like a Ponzi kind of thing. To my knowledge, that was like her relationship to the mob, just the fact that she happened to be the partner of somebody that was, you know, irritating the mob. But yeah, you're right about the trafficking and thing, and I do now remember that her first husband has died mysteriously also, I think. So again, I do think that like the fact that people around this woman keep dying do make you wonder whether or not there is something more sinister to this individual than the like is being let on. Like, you almost feel like the detective chooses to believe that she's a victim of circumstance with the second husband, that she's been abused, and therefore, you know, he almost like decides to let her go for that reason. But then these other deaths that keep on occurring around her make you begin to question how honest she's being, which is, I guess, a classic film noir technique.
And it brings us back to Vertigo, because Vertigo is all about a man falling in love with a woman I guess he can't trust. But I felt like Vertigo is actually pretty straightforward when you're watching it. It's the possibilities and the understandings that feel endless in a very enigmatic way. I guess that's why it's so highly revered. It was number one in the Sight and Sound poll, for example, in 2012. And who knows what will be number one next? Maybe Parasite. Now they let in all these new critics. Who knows? The question is that I think what makes the film so beloved is the use of, I think, real eroticism, which is this lingering of details. I mean, I think that's what sort of draws me to the film, despite many reservations, is this real romantic sense to the film. I think I really opened up when he buys her this sushi, which looks like the most expensive sushi. I think they're in Busan. Probably the most expensive sushi in the city. It's like really nice. Even the box, you can tell from the box that it's really nice. And then later on, when they've had more of an argument and he interrogates her again, I think he buys her what one American critic called was the Korean equivalent of a corn dog. So something a bit cheaper. And there's all these amazing moments. Like, he's in classic film noir fashion, he's an insomniac, and she breathes with him. And some of these scenes is much more compelling as a romance than just sex scenes or whatever. And I was wondering if they were ever going to like have a kiss or whatever. And they do by the end, but that feels very earned, and that feels very emotional and romantic. And I think what it reminded me of a bit was In the Mood for Love, actually. And there is a connection because Lust Caution is Tang Wei's breakout film, I think in 2007, Ang Lee film, and she was opposite Tony Leung in that film. So this is obviously a film within her wheelhouse, as it were, when it comes to these moments. And obviously, she's a beautiful actress, so she has a face for these kind of things, which may or may not matter. Who knows? And I love that part of the film. I think that was probably the strongest part. That at the heart of the film, it was this amazing romance. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. More romance than noir at times. I definitely kind of gave the lift to the film. I think that the romance, though, did seem to come more from him than her throughout, which again kind of makes it feel more like a noir. When she is speaking in Chinese, I think to a bird. No, there's a cat, and it brings her like a dead bird, been buried, and she
Yeah.
says like, "Bring me the head of that detective." And then later, the detective overhears. So he says like, "What did you mean when you said head?" And she says, "I meant heart. I didn't say head. That was a mistranslation from your phone app." I felt like, again, like, does she love him, or is it something else? Is she like using his love to help her to elude capture? Does she do this to men? Does she kind of bring them in and then kill them? Is she a serial killer? And then that whole thing with like the other, it seemed interesting that like, that it seemed like there was this kind of like sinisterness to her, and she is this like outsider to that society. So yeah, I felt like there was obsession from him, which I wouldn't quite call romance, although it was a romantic film. And then from her, I felt like there was a lot of ambivalence and maybe something sinister.
He, of course, was in this relationship with his wife, and that didn't seem like too much of a happy relationship, because you do see a sex scene in the film, and it's between him and his wife early on. So they're trying to say maybe there's something more to romance than just the carnal knowledge, which
Yeah,
was interesting. But I
yeah,
think that maybe she was playing him at first, but then of course I think by the end it is genuine, and then it's the question of, do I need to rewatch the film? If I rewatch the film, will I
yeah,
love it more? It's playing in Berlin in a couple months at 14 Films Around the World Festival, which if you're in Berlin, it's one of the best ones because it does all the films from the year, like at all the festivals. But it's not just like a pointless catch-up fest. They really do pick some really cool films, and the crowds are great. So I'll definitely be there. So maybe I'll rewatch it. I don't know. It depends if they give me a free ticket or not. So who knows?
yeah. I think that the point you're making about the relationship he has with his wife, that kind of underscores the way that he, as a character, is drawn to like perceived excitement, because his marriage doesn't look bad. Like, the wife wants to have like more sex with him, likes him, they have a comfortable like home.
Mm.
She doesn't mind that he's a detective. She almost gives him like, and really cares about him, is trying to help him with his insomnia, gets him to move to a quieter town so that he'll become like less unhealthily obsessed with his job when he does sort of crack up a bit. Like, like that relationship seems really good, and yet he is still chasing someone that he knows to be a murderer.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to wonder, like, what is it about this character that makes him so dissatisfied with an otherwise pretty good situation. Yeah, that I just thought I'd make that point.
And what I was reading a little bit about was that maybe the editing is his headspace, and that's perhaps why the movie feels so chaotic at times. And that would explain quite a lot about some of the cuts. 'Cause there's one bit where he's like recounting something and he's in the mall and then he's seeing this guy who's like, I think he pushes him off the roof, but we never quite know. So that's kind of fascinating at times. It's all very, very confusing. But then we come to the ending where she, spoiler zone, she puts herself in a hole in the beach and then lets the beach wash her over. What did you make of that?
Yeah, this was a pretty interesting moment. First of all, she sort of digs a hole in some sand, then the tide's coming in, and she seems to be sitting in it. And we never see her die. We never see her drown. So I guess one has to wonder whether or not the director's implying that she didn't. She could have not. I don't know. The protagonist is sort of calling her name and trying to find her in the sea, and like running up the beach, and stands on where she may well have been buried at one point, and is calling her name. It's all very quite like melodramatic, but it didn't seem ridiculous either. I suppose is that something to do with how like love dies, and we're left alone or with only the memories of this experience. We can see like a small sort of like pile of sand where she's dug it out. Is that sort of makes me think of you can't step in the same river twice, or that kind of thing. Like, yeah, like the transience of romance, all these sorts of things seem to be coming up. I thought it was a good ending, like definitely going to linger in my mind.
One director who loves an ending by the sea is Hong Sang-soo, and I feel like when he did this in Introduction, or I think A Woman on the Beach Alone Ends at the Beach, I think that was far more powerful because he really opens it up to the character's interiority. But these are such different directors, which kind of what makes Korean cinema so interesting. I'd say it's probably one of the strongest countries for film maybe in the world, and obviously it's taken over. I mean, it's not just film as well, is it? It's the music, which some of it's good, some of it I cannot listen to whatsoever. But I think that's just a testament to the diversity that's coming out of this quite fascinating country. So now we should move towards what people are saying on Letterboxd.
Nice
transition. So, the top review on Letterboxd is by a guy called Carsten, who wrote "Feeling Shattered," 5 stars.
Okay.
1,691 likes. Another guy gets 605 likes for saying "horny ass motherfuckers." Some very long, boring reviews. One guy gets 755 likes for saying "a biopic about my dad." Strange people. A lot of people mention that it starts with a mountain and ends with the sea, which, okay, it does, I guess. And then we get to the half-star reviews. So one person says, "I hope both of them die."
Nice.
Okay. "I wish I made the decision to leave." Another guy writes "simp."
Yeah. I mean, again, I said that I didn't find the ending ridiculous, but maybe it was just the beer, but I kind of did as well. So I don't know. It just did seem a bit silly the way he was kind of like calling her name, like too melodramatic, perhaps.
Now that we've had a little discussion about decision to leave, would you make a decision to tell someone to go pay, or should they make the decision to stay away? It sounds like something from Take Me Out, but this is more from the podcast. So leave your lamp on. No. So decision to Korea or decision to not see her?
I would pay. Go see it. Go pay. It's a pretty good movie. I don't think you'll leave feeling disappointed.
I'd say make a decision to go, but make sure you go with maybe the right person, because I don't think this is a film for anyone. It's definitely not like a first date film unless you're dating someone who's obviously quite intellectual or smart or at least open to these things. I wouldn't just take some random person or like a mate and just hope for the best. I think you want to take someone who like has kind of an interest and wants to talk about it afterwards, because a lot of the enjoyment of films like these are perhaps the discussions you have afterwards. So that's why despite some of the reservations I have, there's still a lot to go for. And I would just restate the thing that I'd rather watch a bad film by this guy than like a good film by a journeyman or a hack. So now, after this discussion, would you like to edit your score? Okay, let's get Northern again. Would you like to switch or stick?
I stick. What did I give? I think I said like it was an 8.
An 8.
I think I said 4 stars. Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, and I think the good thing about this movie is the more you discuss it with people who have also seen it. So I've discussed it with you today, and I've discussed it with my housemates. The more you notice about it, and the more you want to see it again. I just think it was slightly overwhelming, but that just implies that there's a lot there. So I would certainly like to see it again.
So I had this experience with After Sun. I thought it was okay to not that good to just okay. So just talking about a film sometimes can make you pick up on little bits that maybe you missed, or maybe you didn't think about too much, and then you think about the possibilities. So I'd say a decision to leave, I would move from a light 7 to just a 7, not a strong 7, but just a 7. So thank you everyone for listening into this podcast, and thank you to my new subscriber Claudius for subscribing to my new media venture. We really appreciate it, and please tune in next time to see what we will talk about next.